Hi, thanks very much for this. I was wondering a couple things. One, if you could just describe a little bit more detail of exactly what you did, the electrodes that you implanted. I mean, how big were they? How, I guess the strip, how long or whatever. And then it is a wire that comes out and attaches externally to the body. But it's permanently implanted. And then the second part is, could you just explain a little bit more about sort of then what happens? What does this do that enables movement to occur?
Dr. Jonathan Hodes, University of Louisville. The epidural stimulating electrode is a 16, we used a 16 electrode array that's commercially available. And it measures about?
It's 55 millimeters in length and about 1 centimeter, 10 millimeters across.
That's placed into the epidural space, which is between the bone and the dura. The dura envelops the spinal cord and serves as a membrane barrier, keeping all the fluids in and a nice healthy milieu for the cord. And the electrode is attached to a extension lead that is buried underneath the skin and tunneled to a pouch in another location on the body. In Rob, it's behind his, above his hip on the back. And there's a little pocket that's made, and then a pacemaker box, basically. An impulse generator is implanted, and the extension lead is attached to the impulse generator. And then I guess Susie could say what we did next.
Yeah. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
That was Dr. Joel Burdock. Oh,
Dr.
that was Dr. Hodes, but also Joel Burdock, too.
What we did with the implant was to first map the circuitry there. And so we did many experiments to understand what the physiology of that circuitry was. And then we started combining it with the sensory cues. As Reggie pointed out, the sensory information is really what is the driver for the final pattern. So we had to balance and find which stimulation parameters would put the circuitry in the most appropriate state for standing or for walking. And then we continued on and we did training sessions, an hour a day, which, as Rob has already mentioned, were quite exhausting for him. And we, throughout that training period, we kept checking these parameters and modifying them to have them optimal. And over the course of that training, I think the first time he stood up, he could only stand up for maybe 15 minutes, and by the end it was a full hour where he could stand, so that he got much better endurance. And so we did that for several months, and it was at the end of that where we first realized that he could now move his toes, ankles, knees, and hips on command. And then we changed the training paradigm to stepping to see if we could get a stepping pattern. And as Joel mentioned, the technology we use is off the shelf for pain. It's not even designed for what we need, and we need a lot more technology development. So we ran into more barriers when we tried to get the complexity of walking going. So there's still a lot of work to do from a technology standpoint and also from an experimental standpoint to work on those parameters. But really, in summary, what we did is we combined the stimulation with intense either stand training or step training in order to guide the nervous system to respond in a way that was more functional.
So, Reggie Edgerton, let me add a couple of points. I think the electrode array allows us to stimulate multiple segments or somewhat individual segments and areas of segments, but the electrode spans 5 or 6 of the segments that control all of the muscles of the lower limb. And so we had the opportunity to stimulate different areas. But all of these segments work together. They don't work independently. So to get coordinated motion, that whole network in that lower spinal cord has to be working in a highly integrated, coordinated way. And so what we do is we try to stimulate at the lowest level that we can so that then the sensory information can come in and initiate the movement or the motor task that we're trying to do. In other words, the stimulation is not actually inducing the movement. The stimulation is enabling the spinal cord to hear that information coming from the legs, so that then it will basically control what the motor task is.
So let me add just one more technical detail. Joel Burdick here from Caltech. Each of the electrodes, they're arrayed in 3 rows, and each electrode is roughly about 2 to 3 millimeters across and about 5 millimeters tall. It's a little piece of surgical steel covered with platinum, and so when we apply a voltage to each electrode, what happens is an electric field starts to penetrate through the dura into the nervous system, into the actual nervous tissue in the spine, and the higher the voltage you can imagine, the deeper the penetration of the effect. As the electric field gets below and into the individual neurons, what it does is it raises the voltage potential on the membranes there, so those neurons get more excited. Now, if you raise the voltage too high, then what happens is you just force them to oscillate, and so you actually sort of directly drive the muscles. If they're too low, you don't get enough effect, so there's a middle ground where you try to get them excited enough so, as Reggie said, they can function. And also because the circuitry is not uniform through the cord, at different levels along the cord, we need different amounts and types of stimulation. So that's why we use an array, and in fact, in the future, we'll probably use even more complex arrays, so we can really fine-tune which neurons are turned on at what time to give the best results.
Dr. Jonathan Hodes, just to add, in placing the electrode, in order to find the correct location, we stimulated with relatively high voltages in order to stimulate the muscles in Rob's legs. So in the operating room, we were able to detect with electromyography muscle activation in specific muscles depending upon each bit of the electrode that was stimulated. In fact, we were able to activate those muscles for the first time in 3 years at the time when we implanted those, 4 years, and the legs were moving in the operating room.
Become much healthier overall and regain a lot of physical abilities beyond the standing and the voluntary movement that include the lungs and the circulatory system and the heart, and have been able to take myself off medications, which is in turn has allowed me to save a ton of money and just live a healthier life overall now, and has made my life much easier. All of the things that have come back.
What type of medication?
All sorts of different medication, from pain medication to just everything that you could imagine.